That's it for Season 3 then, making now a good opportunity to take stock of what's been going on. We've learned more about the Dominion and its mysterious founders, only to discover that we've already been watching one for a couple of years. Perhaps the presence of Odo is why they haven't just barreled through the wormhole and kaboomed us all by now, though that doesn't mean they've left us alone, either. To be fair to them, they might have had a point with their interference. A joint Cardigan-Romulan fleet going to nuke their homeworld isn't the most diplomatic thing we've ever seen, and the fact that the Federation decided to pause its morals and see how it turned out does a pretty good job of backing up the Founders' argument that we solids are all the same. It's not all been doom and gloom, though. Bashir and Cardassia now have an official peace treaty. Okay, it involved turning Vedek Bareil into Robo-Monk and then him carking it, but we now know that the Cardigans will definitely, absolutely never cause any problems for the Bajorans ever again. They said so, after all. Let's see how the main cast have fared during this turbulent time. All change for Commander Sisko, and not just because he's ending the season as Captain Sisko. He's also dealing with the complicated emotions of his son growing up, as well as the introduction of a potential love interest in Cassidy Yates. He's so enamored with her that he's not even upset that she made captain before him. And all of that is before we even touch on him getting kidnapped and then taken to an alternate dimension, or the bit where he went back in time and became involved in a defining part of Earth's history, after he got the guy who was supposed to do it killed anyway. Oh, and he sailed a wooden spaceship to Cardassia too, because... yeah, alright then, fuck it, why not? The main change for him, though, is perhaps that he's now a proper Starfleet captain, complete with his own ship. That the official promotion only came after he disobeyed the direct orders of an admiral raises some very interesting questions about how Starfleet Command chooses its captains. Kira's had a rough year. Her partner got deaded after being turned into a cyborg, she was the victim of a kidnapping and psyop to convince her she was a Cardigan, and she spent some time revisiting her past life as a resistance fighter. At least that last adventure gave her a chance to stick one to Kai Sin, the Delphic douchebag. Come to think of it, she's been kidnapped twice this season, the second being by Tommy Riker, Billy Riker's teleport clone. You'd think the second in command would be more careful, especially given she spent the majority of her life making sure to not get caught. Maybe Starfleet has made her soft. We've had a few episodes for Dax in this collection, though something of a rarity with one of them, as it focused on the character rather than the fact that she's a Trill host. Meridian gave us a Dax who was willing to change her entire life for a guy she'd just met. I've previously complained that Dax episodes risk being more about the bellyworm than the character, and this is perhaps the monkey's poor response to that comment. What we got was so detached from the Dax we'd been shown to that point that it ended up being one of this season's weaker offerings. Elsewhere, she's learned that a former hidden host of Dax was a proper stabby boy murderer, and the one before Jadzia Dax fancied her. Fair to say, then, that this season has had her dealing with some complicated internal conflicts. Besides his little jaunt buggering up Earth's past with Sisko, the only real adventure Bashir had this season was inside his head. In Distant Voices, a telepathic wanker put him into a coma in an effort to kill him, something that went awry when Bashir's brain turned out to be rather more difficult to conquer than expected. Some would go so far as to say superhumanly so. His friendship with O'Brien has come along leaps and bounds, though, so much so that the pair got wankered together when Bashir was upset. Of course, he got upset because a relative stranger didn't recognize him, so there's still room for improvement on the ego front. The theme of O'Brien being an overworked dog's body was taken to such an extreme in this season that he's technically worked more hours than should be physically possible. The O'Brien we have now is one from a few hours later into another timeline, and I bet the poor bugger didn't even get extra pay for it either. Tightwad bastards. That does, of course, also mean that our O'Brien is legally dead, which is going to be awkward to explain to Keiko if he ever decides to. Having him actually die was the logical extension of the O'Brien must suffer rule, I suppose, so at least it's in keeping with the character. Odo's had a lot to chew on this year. Not only has he found his home planet and species, but he also rejected them because they're despotic wankers, and later that planet got nuked into a molten ball of shit. The Founders are still around, of course, their destruction having been a ruse, but Odo gaining and then losing both in the same year is still a bit of a bugger. It's been a turning point for him regardless, though, him now making a conscious choice to embrace who and what he is. He's still a private person, of course, with things like not inviting random colleagues into his new quarters, but that's now less to do with the shame of being different than simply wanting to have something that's just his. Maybe that will change, though, as he's made connections this year. He reached a tenuous understanding with plain simple Garak, for example, which is pretty generous, what with the torture and all, and tried to bond with an adolescent Gem Hadar, too. Okay, that turned out terribly, but at least he tried. Most notably, though, is the confirmation of his feelings for Kira. He's not made any attempts to pursue that, possibly not helped by Odetta the Founder trying to use his affection as a weapon against him, but it's there nonetheless. Quark's had some fun this season, as long as your idea of fun involves death threats from Klingons. If nothing else, it gave him a chance to remind we viewers that his particular variety of bravery might be more nuanced, but it's no less valid despite this. For those keeping count, Quark being drugged and whisked off to Kronos also brings our kidnapping total this season to 4. Maybe the writers were buying them in bulk. The other episodes where he featured prominently were more explorations of Ferengi society, though Family Business did also cover his past by introducing us to his mother. Learning that he's more like her than his father forced him to address not only his childhood, but also his attitudes to Ferengi culture, which is impressive for an episode that's ostensibly just a comedy. He's not been entirely free of skeevy shit this year, though, and trying to get a holographic copy of Kira to pimp out to one of his customers serves to remind us that, for him, ethics are things that he's willing to weigh against profit and personal danger. Sisko's boy is growing up fast. Not only has he gained and then lost a love interest, and one that both challenged his dad's preconceptions and made him realize there's more to Jake than he knew, but he's also seriously started to consider what to do with his life. He might have decided to hold back on that writing fellowship, a decision I think unfairly influenced by his dad, albeit accidentally, but it's the first spark of something in Jake's character beyond not wanting to follow his dad's footsteps. His friendship with Eggnog continues to grow too, despite some setbacks due to cultural differences, though the show had somewhat less of a focus on always seeing them together. As such, you could argue this is the first season where we saw glimpses of Jake being defined on his own merit, rather than in relation to others. If Season 2 was where we started to see the Federation's underbelly, 3 certainly doesn't help convince us that it was just a blip. When an Obsidian Order and Tal Shiar fleet goes off to do an actual full-on genocide, the official Federation response is to give a bit of a shrug, and the private opinion of Starfleet Command is basically wishing them luck. You could argue that's fair based on the Dominion's destruction of ships sent through the wormhole, but neither of the species involved in the attack against the Founders would have let that go unchecked in their own territory, and even the Federation would have sent a strongly worded letter if they'd been trespassing against us. It's all very messy when you step back and look at it, making it an accurate portrayal of morally nebulous entities engaged in Cold War shenanigans. Those political machinations, then, are the real star of this season, the two-parter of Improbable Cause and The Dyer's Cast being our standout story for me, and by some considerable margin. It was very much the nexus of all the things I like, a fruition of plot arcs stuffed with underhanded gits, and centered on probably my 2 favourite characters in the show. I've made no secret of being rather fond of plain simple Garak, Deep Space Nine's bastard-in-chief, and seeing him fleshed out here would have been worth the entry fee all on its own, even without the bounty of other treats we got from that story. For my money, it's probably the strongest showing of the entire series to date. And that's part of the theme once more, isn't it? Deep Space Nine excels when it presents political plots and character examinations. There have been examples of standard Trek adventures, but they've all been mostly forgettable. Wooden spaceships, disappearing planets, Betazoid telepathic STDs. They're all the sorts of things you'd expect to see on any of the other Trek shows, and their incongruity with what makes DS9 shine is becoming all the more evident. Just as well, then, that behind the scenes, people are starting to agree. Ira Stephen Bear, the executive producer of Deep Space Nine, is on record as saying the end of Season 3 is where the team truly began to make a concerted push towards more serialized plotlines, despite the attitudes of those above them. But we have a new influence added to the mix in our upcoming season, don't we? A second member of the Enterprise D's crew will be joining us, possibly to find out why his old mate O'Brien keeps ending up in the infirmary. That used to be his job, after all. As ever, the names you can see on the side of your screen right now are the ones who've provided actual financial support to this utter barrel of bollocks that we optimistically call a channel. Any enjoyment that you have experienced from it is due in no small part to their monetary sacrifice. Any of you who wish to join them, and profits help you if you do, will find a link on the screen or in the description to our Patreon. Whether it's a brick or a slip, all Latinum received helps keep the lights on. And to those unnamed crew members who are still around despite my best efforts to alienate all of you, thank you for continuing to tune in twice a week. It still hasn't quite sunk in that people genuinely enjoy these ramblings, but we're gonna bloody well carry on doing them until either you all leave or I have to get a real job. End of summary.